Welcome to Business on 101, a podcast that explores the uncommon side of business. I'm your host, Aditi Bousset, and in today's Business Founders interview series, I'm joined by Ben Taylor, founder of thehomeworkingclub.com.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for joining us on Business on 101. How you doing?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm doing good, thank you, yes.
Okay, let's get right into it. First question, 60-second pitch about your business.
Okay, so the elevator pitch. Well, my name's Ben Taylor. I'm the founder of homeworkingclub.com. We are a global site for freelancers and remote workers. I've been a freelancer myself since 2004, so heading for 20 years. And I started the site in 2017 to sort of encourage and advise both aspiring freelancers and remote workers and people who are already doing it. So I have an audience, some people who are just testing the water and some people who are already sort of experienced freelancers and remote workers like I am.
What was your aha moment that sort of struck this and said, oh, you know what, I need to start a community around this?
Well, I think what it was, I just ended a contract that I was doing with a client. I've been sort of moving around in the blogging space since 2009 when I went and moved to Portugal, and I started a blog about moving to Portugal, and that blog spawned a book. And I then ended up very much working primarily sort of writing and doing consultancy work for other blogs, other websites. And I just finished a big contract with a tech site. I was ready to start something of my own, and I thought, well, what niche am I going to go for? And I think obviously that it's best to do something that you know and something that you're passionate about. And from when I was first starting to take my first steps in online freelancing, I started off freelancing in IT consultancy, which was more of a kind of an offline thing. But when I first started looking to do online work back in 2009, when I was first in Portugal, I was the guy who was sitting there looking for how to make money online and all of this kind of stuff. And obviously encountered all of the scammy sites and the sites with false promises. And I mean, it's a huge niche, really. It's massive now, home working in general. And I wanted to bring a kind of unique, realistic take to it. And I think false promises and unrealistic expectations is rife in this niche and in this kind of sector. So I wanted to do it differently, and I wanted to be down to earth, honest, but also, sometimes my honesty is about telling people not to be unrealistic about things as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. I always said there's probably a bigger business selling people to start their business than actual people starting their business. So it is an interesting world.
Oh, yeah. It's like the whole thing about are the only bloggers who are really making money the bloggers who are teaching people how to blog. And that really truly isn't the case. I mean, there are bloggers in every possible niche, from gardening to hair care, making vast amounts of money. But there is still a huge make money online niche in itself of people selling courses. And I mean, I sell a freelancing course, so it's probably a bad example, but that was something that I only actually started doing because a lot of my readers specifically asked me for it. But no, it's completely true what you say. And I think I wanted to break away from so many of these sites saying, if you do this, you're going to make X a month. And it's complete nonsense most of the time. And I wanted to, a phrase that has never really caught on, but a phrase that I got quite attached to was that I wanted to disrupt this with integrity and just do it completely differently, which doesn't always make me popular. Even sometimes I've even had a couple of readers in the past say, oh, you're always putting a downer on things. And it's like, I'm almost pleased to hear that, because it's like, I'm not actually going out there with just raising people's hopes. And people pay a lot of money for false hope, but that's not what I'm about. And that's exactly what the site was never supposed to be.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So I follow you on LinkedIn. That's where we met. And I was really surprised that I did enjoy your content as being very honest and very to the point. So that's something that I agree with. I find there's so much out there that it gets confusing for people. Certainly if you're just starting your own little solo business, little entrepreneurship, or small, startup or freelancing, there's so much. Now, at the beginning, I'm assuming you just started to write, and that was really your core. And then it grew from there. So what was sort of the first things you noticed that this was just turning into a bigger community than just a blog site?
Well, I think I always encouraged interaction. So when anybody signed up for my email list, I actually had quite a long automated message that went back to them, actually encouraging people to reply to the email and tell me specifically what they were interested in. I have to admit that in recent years, I've toned that down a little bit because it got to the point that I was having to dedicate the first 2 hours of every day just to replying to emails. So I do still make myself very accessible, and I still reply to a lot of emails personally, but I have had to tone it down slightly because there just wasn't enough hours in the day for that. But so that kind of pulled it more towards community. And I've also done quite a few surveys over the years so that I get a very good sense of what my demographics are, who's reading, and what specifically they're interested in. And I mean, as an example, freelance writing, it's by a long, long way the thing that people are most interested in. And I don't know if you've seen any of my freelance writing content. I'll give you a particular link for the show notes. I've got a guide to beginners freelance writing, and it's very much reflects the ethos of the site, where I'm being extremely honest about how realistic it is, and also how real. Do you really want to be a freelance writer? Have you actually thought it through? Where I think a lot of people just think, well, I want to sit at home and work, and so I better write. And it's there's dozens and dozens of other things you can do.
That's a great point. So in your core of your community, when you started this, obviously you had a few readers and you had a small community. Did you look to amplify it, or are you allowing it to grow organically and just sort of word of mouth and then sort of grow from there? Or did you actually say, you know what, I see there's positive to this community, let me amplify it by XYZ points?
Well, I think the way I tried to amplify it, and certainly primarily in the early days, my strategy was SEO. And that was having come out of blogging and working for much, much bigger sites. I gained a lot of experience in SEO and in keyword research and stuff like that. Admittedly, that kind of stuff has got a lot harder in the last couple of years. But in the early days, it was a question of, I was pretty confident if I write about X, Y, and Z, I'm going to generate traffic writing about X, Y, and Z. And in turn, that would lead to newsletter signups. And then it just kind of snowballed. And in the first 2, possibly 3 years, it snowballed very much in the way that I hoped that it would, and in the way that I wanted it to. The graphs all pointed up and to the right, to the left, I guess. It depends which way you're looking at the screen. But yeah, all the graphs pointed the right way for a while. And the SEO worked very, very well. And so, yeah, that was my main strategy, was just finding out what people were looking for. And sometimes, yeah, that did mean reviewing earning opportunities that I knew people were searching for, that I knew had the search volume, and I knew that people that were going to bring people into the site. So even if they were things that I wasn't enormously interested in myself. And I also, whenever I reviewed an opportunity, like say a micro-working site, I would sign up myself and I would try to earn money on that site myself. And I wouldn't publish a review until I'd actually cashed out. Whereas so many of these sites just recycle other reviews and take a few screenshots. And it's a very cynical way to address it. And so my content took longer to produce, and I always wanted it to be the best that there was. And what I have done latterly is I don't always do it all myself. But if, for example, I want to review a certain site, like a content mill for writing, I will actually go out there and look for someone who's worked on that site for months and months, if not years and years, or the teaching sites as well. Actually find someone who's been teaching, say, on VIP Kid for years, and then commission them and pay them to write a review. So making sure that the stuff that actually goes up there is written by people who've really tried these things, rather than just cynical kind of just recycling what they can find on the company's website.
Are you going to take this community somewhere else, or are you just going to always keep it online? Are you going to start creating events? Is this something that you've sort of planned out for this community over the next few years?
Well, at the moment, I'm in a bit of a, and I'm going to do my trademark honesty thing at the moment. I feel
Excellent.
like I'm at a bit of a crossroads with the site at the moment, because it has become a lot harder. It's become a lot harder since COVID started, and a lot of people are very surprised by this. And this isn't the first podcast I've discussed this. But what happened when COVID hit, everybody started home working. No one had any options. So home working became a massive topic. And I lost count of the number of friends and colleagues who were just like, well, you must be doing well having a home working site. And it's like, well, actually, it's rather more nuanced than that, because every single newspaper in the world is talking about home working all the time. And so I'm now in a position where I can have a 5,000 word article about something, and all I need is for Forbes to come along and write 400 words on the same topic, and that rockets straight to the top of Google. So I'm finding it a lot harder to actually compete in the search results now. I still rank very well for a lot of terms, but as I was saying a little earlier, in the first couple of years, it was very much the SEO was just completely working for me. It was easy. It was very easy compared to how it is now. Whereas it's become a far more competitive space now. So my email list still grows, but it doesn't grow at nearly the same rate. And if I'm going to be writing about a topic, I'll give you a couple of examples. Things like how to ask your boss to work from home if your company's return to the office post-COVID. I had a how to ask to work from home article before COVID started. Huge article based on real life case studies, 6,000 words of advice. But like I say, everyone's written about that topic now. And I don't think many people find that big article I've written now. So that now gives me a bit of a dilemma every time I come to create a piece of content, which is it actually worth my time or my resource, or worth one of my writers' time or resource to take a punt on 10,000 words that might never really see the light of day beyond when I share it on my email list with my existing sort of online community. So I'm working on exactly what to do, but at the moment I'm not entirely sure where I'm going to go in the long term, because what could well happen is if home working and remote working become talked about less by the more mainstream news outlets and stuff like that, it could be that it becomes much easier to rank organically for these things again. But what I have been doing over the past year is concentrating a lot more on my existing audience and on finding out what they want, enhancing content, and really writing content that I know probably isn't going to be read as widely as it would have been if I'd written it 2 years ago.
Yeah. But it's interesting because it is becoming so crowded. It is becoming such a complex sea of content and information, not just from working from home, but everything around freelancers. It's a great question. So what is going to be your primary goal? Are you planning to go live? Are you planning to take this into a different realm?
Well, I mean, I released a course last September, called Freelance Kickstarter. And I've got a couple of hundred students on the course now. And what you were saying about your kind of super fans, what I like about that is the people who've signed up to Freelance Kickstarter, obviously not all of them, but they are people who have been willing to invest in the future. They're the people that I most want to help, because obviously I'm painfully aware, that there's a lot of people who read my content, think, oh, that was good, and then do absolutely nothing to take forward any of the advice. And obviously the people who make me most happy, and I could think of, obviously I won't name names specifically, but I could think of several people off the cuff and think of their names who I know started reading the site a few years ago with no experience of freelancing, who are now turning away work. And people I'm just in regular casual contact with, and they're so happy because they've got the lifestyle that they want. And that started with them coming to my site, reading some of the advice, and in some cases buying the course, the Freelance Kickstarter course as well. So yeah, I am encouraged to develop the course more, and I've already got some ideas to do a sort of version 2 of the course with more content. And another thing that sort of ties together, and this is the first time I've talked about this publicly at all. Another thing that ties the two things together is, as I said, when I first started freelancing, I was in IT consultancy, and I still do some IT consultancy. I've recently taken on a project management contract back in IT again. It's almost like putting a pair of comfy old slippers back on. And I do actually still do a bit of IT support for clients that I've had around for 20 years, who I wouldn't dream of taking any new work like that. But there are a few who I've built up a long-standing relationship with, and I still look after. And one thing that always comes up is people feeling held back by tech, and sort of the kind of people who say, oh, I'm no good with computers. And I spent years traveling all over London and the wider UK, helping people get better at computers and fixing them and fixing networks and all that kind of stuff. And there's a course percolating around that, which is just a fairly low-cost course, which not to teach people how to use Word, how to use macOS, how to use Windows, but just to get better at those basic things that us techie people that come easy to us. And
Yeah.
do you know, I've been thinking of something around this. Actually, I actually started work on it probably more than 15 years ago about doing it as an in-person course. And it just never happened. And because the freelancing course has been successful, and I did put a poll on one of my Facebook groups asking if anyone would be interested in this course, and overwhelmingly people were like, oh, yes, please, I really want that. So, yeah, I'm going to work on that before the end of the year as well.
That's a great point. And it's actually something that a lot of people are talking about. I have a friend who has an IT business who does support for small businesses. And I said, oh, it must have been hard because you can't go in person. And he said, I can't keep up. There's so much demand because now people realize their equipment's even their lifeblood of their business. So it's really, I think certainly freelancers need to understand this, not just walking around with your MacBook or, your Surface Pro and say, okay, I'm good, I'm ready to go. You really need to understand it and be able to fix it on the fly when you're working. It's your lifeblood.
I think so, yeah. And it's also about having just a slightly deeper understanding, because there are a lot of freelancers who get by, but there are also freelancers who are potentially on really dodgy ground when it comes to compliance, because they're doing stuff like not putting encryption on and walking around with their clients' data ready to be left in the back of a cab.
That's a whole other show just on security and encryption. I know.
Absolutely, yeah. People who aren't running backups, people who aren't doing enough in terms of cybersecurity. I'm almost laying out the modules of this course, but they're the kind of things that could save freelancers a whole load of stress, because these are things that don't stress you out until they happen, and then suddenly they're a complete disaster.
Exactly.
So yeah, trying to sort of preempt that. And I've thought about the value proposition of this course, and it's just like, if this course was $100, $150, and it saves you one visit from your IT person, then I think that's a good value proposition.
Yeah, and this actually ties in really well, because here's a great question. So when you're about to launch such as a new course, and you're going to go off and even just pitch it to see, are you using only Facebook, or are you going across social media, or in a pitch and seeing what they say? What's your take on this?
I usually start out with my email list, and that's what I did with Freelance Kickstarter. I think, so I completely with my email list, because I initially made it part of a survey. I asked people if they would be interested in the course, what they would pay for the course. So I got an idea of what proportion of my email list would be interested in that, because I cover remote working as well, and I can even cover people who are interested in casual side gigs. So it's not like my entire audience was interested in freelancing. And I then I then sent out on another email asking if people would like to beta test the course. And so I expected to get a handful of people back, and I think I got over 200 volunteers. So then they became the people who were able to beta test the course, were able to give me feedback that I acted on, and were also able to give me some testimonials, which was handy as well. So that would be exactly the same as I would do before. If it was just a question of just getting a very quick straw poll of something, Facebook's great for that. I've got a couple of thousand people in a private Facebook group. And yeah, so just, I'm wondering about doing this. Are you interested? Even if you only get 20 responses, that can be useful to give you a quick overview of whether it's worth pursuing an idea or not. Yeah. But once you get onto the email list, you could then sort of subsection people down. And then, for example, all right, these are the people who've volunteered to beta test the course. If I wanted to then probe more and ask some more specific questions, like what should be in this course, what would you like to see in it, I could then survey them separately. So having a decent email list that you can segment down, I think is I'm not that strong on social media personally, but I think the email list is mine. They're people who I can tell how engaged they are. I can tell how many emails they open. I find for me, it's way easier to drill down to people who are interested in certain things from my email list. But obviously you've got to build one up first.
So how would you suggest, because obviously people coming on to your site and talking to you and interacting with you, they probably ask that question, right? How do I build my audience?
There's no black and white about this, because it's quite niche specific. I mean, people in well-being and fitness and that could find their communities on Instagram. My community's not on Instagram. So it does depend on what you're doing. I'm a big fan of Reddit as well for this kind of thing. If you're willing to really absorb yourself in a community and not expect anything back from it. I mean, very few Reddit threads even let you post a link to a blog. It's pretty much banned across Reddit. But for me, I was very fortunate because I managed to generate a lot of organic traffic, which meant a lot of people were seeing my pop-ups and seeing my sign-up forms. And it was pretty effortless to build my email list. It's harder now because it's harder to generate organic traffic now. And I don't think that's unique to home working either. I mean, I think everyone is universally agreed on the fact it's just way harder to rank on Google now, a big business or a known brand. So I was lucky, I guess, in when I did it, because my email list wouldn't build at nearly the rate. It isn't growing at anywhere near the rate that it was a couple of years ago. But if you can generate traffic and you can give, obviously, the usual thing to do is to give away some kind of lead magnet. And I do give away a sort of home working secrets guide, a PDF, which I've put effort into. It's nothing fantastic, but it's that extra kind of enticement to sign up. To begin with, it was literally just sign up to join my list for updates and ideas. And that was all I was giving away for an email address for the first few years. I have added a lead magnet.
That's really interesting. And, it sort of makes me think, so years ago, I said newsletters are dead. Like I said, there's no way people are going to keep getting newsletters. Yet somehow they keep growing. And it's really an interesting aspect. So I'm torn. Part of me thinks like, no, that just doesn't make sense. How much do they get open versus, the time and effort put into it? But it seems to be a growing segment of the business world, of the marketing. And so do you feel that in doing your newsletter, obviously in your content, you share it across your other Facebook or Reddit, but do you tell your audience, okay, if you're going to do a course, if you're going to start your own side business, do you encourage them to create a newsletter, or do you encourage them just to post on like LinkedIn and just stay relevant when somebody's starting?
Well, I mean, it's slightly different because the people who I'm teaching on my course are people who want to go into sort of one or more freelance endeavors. So something like freelance writing. So I would say community building wouldn't be a priority for them. Client building would be building a client base would be the priority for them. So it's rather different because I'm focused more on people who want to build, or certainly the course is focused more on people who want to build that initial freelance career as opposed to a business. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So it's really just people, they want to get paid. So for them, it's finding the next gig. Yeah. Whereas other types of freelancers or more businesses are looking to build a community and then reap the rewards of the community. So it's kind of like the two sides of it, but I get it.
Yeah.
And so do you find that most of the people signing up with you and following you are going to remain as freelancers?
I would say, well, as I've said, I don't only talk to freelancers, I talk to remote workers and stuff as well. I would say yes, the majority of the people who buy the course and the target market really for the course are people who want to freelance as opposed to having a job. And that is very much who the course is aimed at. And I would say, based on the people in my social groups and what I know of my demographics from surveys and stuff, that's what most of my readership has ended up being. I'm not the kind of online marketing hustle school type side of the market. Having said that, I do have another little side thing going on, which is that I have a Patreon group, and maybe you'd be kind enough to share the link to it, where I'm actually building another site at the moment called tinylittlechanges.com, and that's a self-improvement site. Did loads of stuff in lockdown. I got fit. I lost a bunch of weight. I quit drinking 10 months ago and just started doing a lot of kind of well-being stuff and thought, what shall I do for my next project? And I thought, I'm passionate about this stuff. I'll write about this stuff. And I thought, right, I'm starting another blog from scratch. I've done it loads of times before, both for myself and for clients. It'd be quite good to share this. And then I thought, if after everything that I do, I've got to write a post about it, stick it on Home Working Club, knowing that only a subsection of my readership are going to be interested in it, it's too much work. So again, I went to the email list, said who's going to be interested in this, and ended up with a small but perfectly formed group of my subsection of my readers who were interested in starting a new blog. So the members of the group, I get a couple of videos and an article, something around that each month. and I'm talking them through the process. So I'm sharing my first income, my first page ranking, and all this kind of stuff. So that does lean a little bit more to the building a business side of things. But it's a very small little mini project I've got going on the side.
No, it's interesting though. It's interesting. I think I do see that there's a need for it in the communities. And what I notice is that within a community, there's a lot of fragmentations. I've noticed that in other groups where they start creating their own sort of niche solution to a problem, and they decide that within that community, they'll solve it, as opposed to leaving that existing community and find a new community that's already solving it.
Yeah.
So I found that very interesting. A lot of the people that I've interviewed and talked to over the years that have a community, that they tend to realize like you become jack of all trades often in certain groups because they're looking for you for the answers. Kind of like, okay, how do I fix my kitchen sink? Well, no, this is not what I do, but this is how you do it anyways.
Yeah.
And the next question is, do you feel like your community is going to become something bigger than it is today?
I've not really got aspirations for that at the moment. I'd be happy to just see it steadily. I'm very attached to it. I'm very fussy about the content that goes up. I mean, I have a couple of freelancers who work for me regularly, and I do commission articles and stuff like that. But I've not got aspirations to make it huge. I'd like it. I wish it was still growing at the rate it was for the first few years. But no, it's possibly, but it works online. It's the format I originally had in mind for it. I mean, I've got my own podcast as well. I've got the course. I've got the social side. I think I've got my fingers in it. I've got the Patreon for the people who want to be bloggers, I think, and I've got my own work. And so I think I've got my fingers in enough pies for now.
That's enough for you. That's it for now.
But ask me again in a year. I'll have something else I want to do by then, I'm sure.
Actually, you know that I mentioned this to all my guests for sure. I'd love to have you back, see where you are in a year, see where the business is. So that's pretty cool. Well, I think that kind of covers everything. So I'm going to jump into the rapid round questions. When I started this, as I say this almost all the guests now, I started this as to sort of surprise people and give a little bit of flash at the end of the podcast. But now I find myself, I'm asking the same questions because that's really what the ones I'm interested in. Okay. So, and I think most people would be. So my first question is, what business book would you share with people saying that they had a massive influence on you and your business?
Okay, I'm going to just very quickly Google this just to make sure I tell you the right one. Right, it's called The Messy Middle by Scott Belsky.
Oh, that's new. I didn't hear about that one.
It's not the first time I've recommended this, but it's a book not about startups, but a book about when your business is already established and you kind of reach that point when you've started to gain momentum. So what they talk about the middle, as it say on the front cover, finding a way through the hardest and most crucial part of any bold venture.
And I think it's quite interesting.
I think it's quite refreshing to read a business book that isn't about the startup phase. It's more about how to scale once stuff gets, and it can be harder. And it's stuff like, there's a really good bit on it in dealing with stagnation as well, which happens with it. It happens so often with businesses that you climb and climb and climb, everything's going well. And as has happened, as I've already said with Home Working Club, it hit a stage where it sort of went up and up and up, and then it kind of just sat there for a bit. And yeah, I recommend it for that reason. And it's laid out in sort of nice bite-sized chapters. It's kind of, you can read from cover to cover or go pick and mix with it. It's a great book.
Excellent. Second question. How do you stay organized? Because you obviously have a lot going on in your plate every day.
Okay. I lean on Trello heavily, and I have lots and lots of Trello boards. So I've got one for Home Working Club, one for my new site, tinylittle.changes.com. I've just started one for the new project, the new IT project I'm managing. And Trello I like to use for high level. So that's to keep, and also for making sure I don't lose ideas as well. So I have a content pipeline in Trello. So when I come up with article ideas, they go straight in there. So I've always got this bank of stuff to go to when I need something to write or when one of my writers needs something to write. I also do my goals on a quarterly basis, and I've actually done a little YouTube video about this. I'll give you the link for that, where I lay everything out. I do it every quarter, and I lay everything out in short, medium, and long term. So we're about to go to quarter 3. So I'm about to go through this process again myself. So short term is stuff that I've absolutely got to do. Non-negotiable, keeping up with client work and making sure there's enough content going up and stuff like that. Medium term is stuff that by the end of the 3 months, I want to see it done, but quite when I'll fit it in is unclear. And then long term is stuff that I do want to get started, but I'm probably not going to beat myself up if I don't tick everything off by the end of the 3 months. I wish I remembered which book I read this process in, because I've been doing it for years and it's brilliant. It works so well. So stuff from that will find its way into Trello in a more itemized way. But then on the day-to-day, I use Microsoft Outlook tasks, and that's my looking at the following day and looking on the day at what I've actually got to do each day. So I do see myself, I don't want to sound conceited, but I do see myself as quite organized in terms of what I do.
It sounds like it, that's for sure.
I'm quite good at laying out what to do and sticking to it.
That's good. Yeah, I think it's called block timing, the last part. I've seen this. I use it in my journaling. So I write out every day what's important, what I can do without, and things that I can, like, if I don't get them done, they're written off and I cross them off my list. So that's interesting. And I think a lot of people need to do that. I think people try to take on too much and then trying to get every task done, and it just blinds them for the bigger picture. So that's brilliant.
I think it's also important to be accepting of it when something that you've planned to do, you get halfway through it and you think, do you know what, this isn't actually giving me the returns that I hoped it would. I could give you an example of that. I had a big content refresh project planned for Home Working Club, which was, I think I was up to about 400 articles. And obviously you get to the point where it's almost like you paint a skyscraper and you get to the top and you've got to start again. And I had everything very deeply planned out in terms of a content refresh with this enormous spreadsheet of how many incoming links everything had, how much traffic everything was getting, how all of that kind of stuff. And the plan was to work through it and refresh all of my content in this very organized way, but it was enormously time consuming. And I was finding that, having invested a lot of weeks and months in it, that in terms of the increase in traffic when I was refreshing articles, I was getting just as good a results when I did it on instinct. And it was almost like I'd invested that much time. I got that spreadsheet. It's heartbreaking to look at that spreadsheet. But I had to get to the point where I was like, do you know what? If I'd be better off just each time a writer says, what work do you need me to do? I'm better off looking at it at the time than going back to that spreadsheet that's being impacted by a Google algorithm update every 6 weeks.
That's so funny. Yeah, how to pivot and kill an idea. I think that's every entrepreneur, every business owner has a struggle with, the ROI, and it's difficult to do in real time because some things seem so costless and then you don't realize how much it actually did cost you.
Yeah.
And, and then you can get overwhelmed by it. So it's actually really hard. I think we all go through it. I think we struggle. I think everybody will talk about it and act like they figured out a solution. And at the end, they're doing the same thing. They just keep burning up time on things that they shouldn't, but it's just something that sits with them. So that's really interesting.
It's not being scared to cross something off a list, but even though you've written it on the list with all the best intentions, there's nothing wrong with going back to that list and thinking, nah, it's not worth doing that, and just putting a line through it.
That's it. That's well said. Well, that's my rapid round questions. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. There's lots of brilliant bits and pieces. And thank you again.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.